everyone, it's Tony D and it's time for Screenwriting Tips. Today we're going to talk about superhero movies. Okay, this could be a two-parter, I'm not sure. I got a lot to say about superhero movies. As many of you know, I work in the comic book industry, so I'm well versed in the milieu or the subgenre or whatever you want to call it. So if you're going to write a superhero screenplay, there's a couple things you need to understand. Number one, what is a superhero? So if you look at a movie like Die Hard, John McClane, is he a superhero? Well, he certainly does superheroic things in the movie, but I don't think you could call John McClane a superhero because, number one, his fight is not a fight of choice. And I think that's a key element in a superhero movie. I think a superhero has to choose to fight evil, whereas John McClane, even though he fights evil in the movie and he's a hero, his fight is one of circumstance. He's sort of forced into it and has to do it. Obviously, you know, your typical superheroes, Batman, Spider-Man, Superman, all those, they're superheroes by definition because that's what they were created to be. Speaking of superheroes, my doggy's here. Come here, doggy. Come here. You want to be in this video? Come on. Come on. Oh, you're my superhero, doggy. Joan, everybody. Joan of Arc. Okay. Settle down. All right. So, now you might look at Batman and say, well, he doesn't have any superpowers. That's not really the standard. The powers aren't the standard, and when you look at Batman, he really is a guy who uses gadgets and his martial arts as a substitute for superpowers. So it's not necessarily about having superpowers, but being able to accomplish things that are beyond human, right? So there you have it. Another key component of superheroes is they have to have a look. They have to have a costume of sorts. They fight evil in that costume, right? Or they have such a distinctive look, you look at them and know, hey, that's a superhero. So if you take a character like James Bond, and we talked about Bond in the Bond video, Bond doesn't have a distinctive look per se, right? He just wears suits, he's well dressed. Yeah, he'll be in a tux in every movie, and you know, but he's not in a uniform where he fights crime. Also, another key component, superheroes fight crime with their own code. And Bond is a guy who works for a particular government. Yeah, he may sometimes go rogue, but ultimately he's about saving the UK because he's in MI6, and that's what those guys do. So I would also argue a character like the Savage Dragon, which is a comic book at Image, he is in some respects closer to not being a superhero. I still think he's a superhero, but you know, if you did a Savage Dragon movie, it's quite possible, because he is a police officer, that it would be more of a cop film than it would be a superhero movie. So with the elements of the superhero, you have a guy or girl or alien or whatever fighting for justice, fighting a code that they themselves have created. They have some sort of costume or look to them, and they also have a villain, at least one, sometimes multiple villains. The best one had multiple villains. And that villain is usually the antithesis of the hero, right? So, you know, he is as evil as the hero is good. When you compare Batman and Superman, Batman is a rich guy who uses all his knowledge and money and power for good, whereas Superman fights a guy who's rich named Lex Luthor, who is just as smart, just as, you know, brainy, but he uses his powers for evil. So there you go. That's the dichotomy there. So let's say you want to write a superhero movie. What should you do? The first thing you have to understand is you cannot compare the kind of movie you're going to write to Marvel and DC movies. Even though the DC movies haven't done as well overall, I think the Marvel movies, I think most people would agree, the Marvel movies have been pretty spectacular. I mean, ever since Iron Man 1, you know, they've just had an amazing run of movies. Well written movies. I mean, if you look at those screenplays, they're really well done. But you have to be very careful when you're writing your movie. You can't write them like most of the Marvel movies. You have to look at Iron Man 1. Like, that's a good one because it's very self-contained. They didn't know at that point if they were going to franchise so many. And that movie works all by itself. All by itself. You could have just made that movie and never made another one and it would have been fine. When you look at a movie like Avengers, that was a movie that built up. You know, they made all the separate movies with the characters and then built into the Avengers. And you can do that, certainly, but understand that if you're a screenwriter and you're trying to sell a screenplay, whether it's to Hollywood or to just get it made by, you know, a local production company or whether you're going to shoot it yourself, you can't think that far downstream. You know, putting elements of that sort of down the stream stuff in your movie really is a distraction. You know, that's why you don't see that kind of thing in Iron Man 1. It's not really gonna, you know, play. They didn't have an after credit sequence in Iron Man 1, right? I don't think they did. He didn't come in until later. Anyhow, you know, the idea that you can start, and you have to understand the Marvel and DC characters have, you know, Superman came out in 1938 and Batman in 1939. These are characters that are almost 80 years old. And all the Marvel ones are, I think they're all over 50 at this point. The major ones anyway. So you can't compare your superhero to them. They have the history backing them. You can do a Superman movie with an obscure character and make it work simply because it's Superman. Same thing with Spider-Man. Like the newer Spider-Man movies, they're finally drilling down to the more obscure superheroes. They're not doing Doc Ock in the next one. The word is they're going to do, I think Mysterio is in the pipeline, which is a great character, by the way. I'm looking forward to see it, but you know, it took them a while to get to Mysterio. They wouldn't start with Mysterio as a villain in Spider-Man. He's, you know, he's not the biggest villain. You know, the one that most comic fans and fans of Spider-Man would remember would be the Green Goblin, because he is, you know, Spider-Man's Joker. Just like with Batman, they always go to the Joker first and then everybody else second. So with your superhero movie, you want to really think outside the box, okay? So if you look at a movie like Chronicle, right? That was a different kind of superhero movie. That was like a, you know, a realistic version of three young men getting superpowers and how it kind of messes them up. If you look at Night Shyamalan's trilogy, well, he's putting out the third one, Mr. Glass. You know, he did Unbreakable, he did Split, and now he's doing Mr. Glass, and that's becoming the superhero thing. His take on it was a very subtle take on superheroes, right? Very, very light. Like, you're not even sure, is this guy a superhero? Is he crazy? It was a lot of controversy, especially with Unbreakable, and even with Split. Like, I don't think he really has superpowers per se, but then in, you know, this new one, it's going to be exacerbated, and you're going to see more of that. So then you have a movie like Rainn Wilson was in this movie called Super, where he decides to become a superhero. He doesn't have any superpowers. He just has a wrench and he hits guys. And, you know, it ends up getting very bloody, and it really was more about a guy doing the superhero thing rather than a superhero per se, as compared to a movie like Kick-Ass, which was in a similar vein in that, okay, nobody has superpowers, and this guy and a bunch of other people want to become superheroes and walk around the city and, you know, try to be superheroes. So there's different ways. You definitely have to think outside the box if you're going to do a superhero movie, and understand that you cannot reinvent the wheel, and that requires a ton of research. You know, when you think about the 80-year history basically of Superman, they've literally done everything in that comic, and in Batman, and in Spider-Man, and in the Hulk, and all of them. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there and a lot of weird stories. I remember a Superman story that I had as a kid. It was like Superman gets on a bus with a bunch of people, including Lois Lane. The bus ends up going back into the time of the dinosaurs, and then it turns out the bus driver is a shape-changing alien that's trying to strand Superman back in the past of Earth and leave him behind, and then he has to fight the shape-changing alien on the time-traveling bus, and you know, he gets exposed as Superman, and then he has to not only beat the alien, but then go back in time to save everybody who was trapped in the age of the dinosaurs, and get back to the present day and erase everybody's memories so they don't remember he's Clark Kent. I mean, you know, that's a lot. That was a lot in a comic book, and that's a lot to put in a movie. You know, if you look at a movie, and I would consider this a superhero movie, Judge Dredd, right? And not just because it was a comic book. Dredd is a character who, as compared to the other people in his world, he's the best in a terrible world, right? So it's really like kind of like superhero noir. And I'm talking about the Carl Urban Judge Dredd movie. I'm not talking about Sylvester Stallone. The Sylvester Stallone one made a huge rookie mistake in terms of superheroes, and that is they put too many comic books all in one movie, along with some other problems that the movie had. You know, just ignoring the whole superhero milieu for Dredd. Dredd never takes his helmet off. Dredd's not really a compassionate guy. He's kind of a fascist. You know, they kind of softened Dredd too much and had Stallone take off his helmet, which really defeats the purpose of a Judge Dredd movie. Just like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie, which, you know, they got rid of the shirt. Why would you get rid of the shirt? Punisher's basically a guy in a shirt. I mean, that's, you know, that's it. So if you're doing a superhero movie, step one, you know, you're going to have to come up with a self-contained story. 3 acts. Usually it's a revenge story. Now, understand that if you are thinking down the road and you don't want it to just be a one-shot, you can't do the most important story. So there's a comic book, and I would consider this a superhero comic book, called She by Bill Tucci. Really good comic about she's like a female samurai, and it was very popular for a while, and then Bill finally did the story where she gets her revenge. And that, to me, is kind of the most important story in the series, right? So if your character, you know, becoming a superhero is instigated, like Batman, right? Batman became Batman because his parents were killed by a mugger. If Batman catches that mugger and brings him to justice, the story's over. There's no more important villain for Batman to capture than that guy. So it's better, you know, from a story standpoint, if you want something ongoing, that the character cannot get his justice because he's driving to get that justice that he can never get. So that's the part that drives Batman. That's the storyline that drives Peter Parker, right? His uncle is killed. He could have saved him, and he didn't. And that's what makes Peter Parker Spider-Man. So you need a hook like that to really, you know, if it's a serious superhero. Obviously, if you're doing Blank Man or some kind of parody like My Super Ex-Girlfriend, you know, the origin is not as important. But I would say that those movies are more comedy movies than they are superhero, right? So if you want to do a superhero movie about superheroes, you have to make superheroes work. within the confines of the movie. You know, Kick-Ass does it because nobody has superpowers. And really, it's as realistic as superheroes get in the modern day. So if you're going to do a movie, it has to be self-contained. You definitely want to use the 3-act structure. I don't think you want to spend too much time on the origin of the superhero. That can really bog you down. Even with superhero movies where, you know, the character is very well established, like Spider-Man and Superman, like a lot of that is just wasted time. So you want to get the superhero portion out of the way, get to the powers, definitely get it over by the first act, right? The guy has his powers, and now he can finally make the decision to fight evil because, you know, now he has this power and responsibility. So he gets a costume and, you know, goes to town. The second act has to be mostly about fighting crime, getting good at fighting crime, going after, you know, that villain, that big villain that's lurking in the background, and maybe there's more. You know, that's important to a superhero movie if you want a world of superheroes down the road. You don't want to get too into it because that's going to dilute your message. Certainly in Iron Man 1, you know, it was about Tony Stark, you know, becoming Iron Man, and his emotional journey was figuring out, hey, you know, being a weapons guy was bad. I sold all these weapons to various people, and I never thought about how it impacted. And then I got caught and captured by one of these guys, and I had to suffer under him, and I can't let people suffer like that anymore. So that's another good origin story. So you need that origin story. It has to be key to the whole character and the whole first thing. And then it's about upping the ante, having a big fight at the end, of course. I mean, obviously it's superheroes. I can't think of a superhero movie that doesn't end in a fight. So you definitely want some action. And, you know, again, you want a colorful costume, something that, you know, really speaks to the superhero. So in, let's say, Darkman or The Shadow, you have a very sort of subtle costume, right? In Darkman, he's always in disguise, but then when he's not in disguise, he's kind of like all covered up and, you know, not really dressed as particularly anything. In The Shadow, he has like most of his face covered up, and then he has like a mental ability to make the face that you do see, the portion of the face you do see, look just a little different. So when you see him unmasked as Lamont Cranston, you don't recognize him. So, you know, and then, you know, you got a character like Daredevil or Batman, they just wear a mask. So you need that. You need those elements in some respect. You know, even if your guy, you know, has an open identity like Tony Stark does as Iron Man or the Savage Dragon, you still need a look for that character because that's going to make sense. And of course, you know, if you have an open identity like Tony Stark does, you also have to have, you know, a sensible explanation of how that person is going to function in society without a secret identity. Because let's be honest, you know, if the movie's going to take place in the modern era, if you punch somebody, you could be arrested. If they know who you are, they're probably going to arrest you. I mean, certainly a villain's not going to have any problem with, you know, throwing a guy in jail. So, again, you really need to think outside the box. You really need a different pitch. You look at The Incredibles, the pitch is, you know, it's like the Fantastic Four if they were a family of four, right? And that gives you different elements because the character dynamic between the mother, the father, and the children is different than four adults in the Fantastic Four. Even though they're the Fantastic Four characters are as close as a family, they're still not blood related, which definitely changes, you know, the deal. So you got to read a lot of comics if you're gonna write a superhero movie to kind of know what's out there. The Crow is another one, you know. The Crow is definitely a superhero movie because he definitely has superpowers. He definitely has a look, you know, and he avenges people and then keeps coming back. So, you know, if you're going to do a superhero movie, use the 3-act structure, know the medium, know what it is, and don't try to recreate the Marvel movies right out the gate, okay? Because unless you've got $1 billion burning a hole in your pocket that you can make 5 or 6 movies, you're gonna have to build up a franchise slowly over a period of time. So you need a realistic goal, and you know, movies are hard enough to produce. So you know, trying to produce or trying to map out like 5 or 3 movie trilogy, you know, even for a big guy like M. Night Shyamalan, how long ago did he make Unbreakable? Yeah, he might have had the idea for the trilogy back then. Clearly the elements are in the first movie, but you know, it was a long time before he made Split. And he's a pretty decent Hollywood guy. I mean, that's a guy who would get funding for a movie. So, you know, unless you got the funding in place, slow it down. And my other advice is understand that the superhero genre is really tapped out at this point. You know, I've been saying it for a while, and a lot of my cohorts have been saying it. How much longer can this superhero stuff last? I don't really know. I think it all ends with the second Infinity War movie. I think, you know, I think Captain Marvel is going to be the beginning of the end for the Marvel movies. You know, I'm sure it'll be fine, but it doesn't look great. And I think by this point, people are going to be sick of it. They're going to be looking for that, you know, hole in the armor. And then you're going to have the Infinity War 2, where, you know, rumor is Captain America dies, Robert Downey Jr. might be done with it. You know, a few of the celebrities might be like, this is all done. And they may be going their separate ways. And that means recasting everybody. And that's going to change everything. Look at what happened with the second round of Spider-Man, right? Tobey Maguire and Sam Raimi killed it. And the third movie was rough, but still, you know, it was a solid entry. Then they had another round with, you know, the guy from the Facebook movie. Didn't do so good. Now they're back again, but, you know, that's Spider-Man. That's a trademark that's going to last forever. You're making a new superhero movie. That's going to be a tougher sell. You know, if people have the choice for seeing another Spider-Man movie, even a bad one, and your unknown entity, they tend to go for what they know. So, you got to raise the bar, think outside the box, and make a superhero movie that kicks ass. Okay? 3-act structure. That's it for superhero movies on Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony. Joan, my little superhero, we say goodbye to you. Speaking of comics, check me out on the Webcomic Factory and Superfrat. And if you have any comments, tips, questions, whatever, write it in the comments section, and I'd be happy to answer your questions about screenwriting. Thank you, and good night.